Well, thank you all for coming and joining us at PEX201, building a sustainable practice for tomorrow. And we are here today to share with you a little bit of our journey at Amazon and want you all to be part of that journey of sustainability with us. I'm Deborshi Chaudhry. I'm a partner management solutions architect out of Toronto, and I work for AWS. And with me, I have...
Hey everyone, I'm Mansi. I'm also a partner solutions architect. I am based out of Seattle and really excited to be here today to talk to you about sustainability.
Hey, I'm Rolf. I work for a premier AWS partner called Innovate, and my responsibility there is VP of Technology in Cloud Services.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks, guys. So this is what we have in our agenda today. So we'll cover the overview of sustainability. We'll talk about different industry trends that we are seeing from our customers today. Mansi will walk us through sustainability architectures, and then we'll talk about some of the sustainability offerings that we have. These offerings are from our ProServe team. A few of them are already baked in, a few of them are still getting baked. So this is just to share the ideas with you folks as partners so that you can take these ideas away and probably implement these kind of offerings for your customers. And from then, we will pass it to Rolf, and he will talk about Know-It, how they develop sustainability practice, walk us through it. And we'll wrap it up with next steps and Q&A. Don't bother about the questions. We already planned it our guys, so, right. But anyway, so let's start with what is sustainability. Well, if we go by the definitions of United Nations, sustainability is meeting the needs of today while without compromising the ability of meeting the needs of our future generations. So in the essence, we are taking care of the planet not only for us, but for our children and for our children's children and thereafter. So sustainability is a broad term, and it touches many areas of our economy. And from decarbonization, which we are decarbonizing everything to make sure to limit the effects of the climate crisis, then water usage, and how do we use the water effectively? How do we make sure the water is clean and properly used and not wasted? Social responsibility, that includes responsible employment and supply chain practices. And then we have circular economy. How do we make sure that there's a proper recycling in place? So these are key and important elements of building a sustainability practice in an organization. So what is driving this trend? And what we are seeing around the world and calls for economic, racial, and gender equality, human rights, these voices are getting louder, and so it should. And a new, younger generation of consumers are essentially looking for companies and products which stands for good, which stands for a particular purpose. And it is becoming an increasing trend across all various kind of businesses. We are seeing customer demands for products around sustainability, products and services both around sustainability grow. We are seeing there is an increase in government regulations, be it at this moment as a draft, or in a lot of regions, we are already seeing those regulations getting implemented. We are also seeing employee demands. We are seeing investors that want to invest in businesses which has some kind of sustainability associated with it. And we are seeing sustainability's competitive advantage and competitive positioning across various product lines and services as well, all the way from, let's say, packaging to clothing and et cetera. So this is a differentiation factor for a lot of our customers today. So talking to various customers about sustainability, we at AWS created this value map, and it's a representation of our customers talking to us about their strategy and understand what their strategy should be like in the long run. So the first one is decarbonizing the business, and the use case, usually in this case, is any company, they have some kind of a goal. They want to reduce their environmental impacts, and someone in the business, in that company, in their organization, is responsible to reduce their greenhouse gas emission. And so they need help in automating and gathering all those data inputs and want to report it out to the stakeholders, report it out to the regulatory bodies. The second is reducing the environmental impacts, and this is not just the impact at the energy and the emission level, but also at reducing waste and pollution and developing some new services as well. So someone in the product team essentially is trying to develop a new product which is much more greener than what it used to be, and it's a differentiation factor again for this customer. And last but not the least is the sustainable strategy. And the use case in this case are companies seeking to validate their sustainability strategy and kind of set those benchmarks to define success. So this is what we are seeing. Many of these cases in the third category, we are seeing that they have already made a top-level commitment, and they're kind of working backwards from their commitment, and they need help how to make it a data-driven approach, data-driven action, and try to align it with those regulatory compliance and requirements. So great news is pretty much, as you can see from the screen, like every industry has some kind of goals to drive sustainability for themselves. And this is in Europe due to regulatory pressures, and in US for the perceptions of incoming regulatory pressures. And a few of the other regions, they're in draft and the onset or the oncoming of those regulatory pressures. So our partners can essentially, in every part of the region, in every vertical of the industry, they can help these customers out and help them drive sustainability. So this is a high-level UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and as you can see, all the 17 buckets here. It's a great high-level framework, and this is for a large entity, for a large corporation, probably it might be all the buckets might apply to them, but for any other corporations or any other companies, they probably would be affecting one or few of them. And maybe we probably can have some impact and some capacity in each and every part of the framework that we have here today. But as a technology company, as a technologist, I think, and this is my belief, as our starting point, our sweet spot is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So I'm going to hand it off to Mansi, and she will walk us through architecting for sustainability. Mansi.
Awesome, thanks, Deborshi. So we often read a lot of news about sustainability and how governments and large corporations have sustainability goals for building a better world for the future. But have you really asked yourself as a developer or as a software architect how you can make a difference by addressing sustainability challenges? So let's kind of start off by taking a look at some of the advantages that you get out of the box by just using the AWS cloud. So in 2019, AWS commissioned a report on carbon emissions called the 451 report of cloud versus typical enterprise data centers, which basically found that AWS was much more energy efficient and had a significantly smaller carbon footprint compared to most other US data centers. And so a lot of this carbon reduction is attributed to different factors, including things like efficient servers, trying to achieve higher utilization, more efficient data center facilities, reduced electricity consumption, and then also a lot of renewable energy usage as well. And so since this report was released, AWS has made a lot more progress, having released the highly efficient Graviton processor, and then also dozens of new renewable energy projects in their efforts to continue greening the cloud. So there's 6 main design principles to consider for sustainability in the cloud. So the first one being understanding your impact. So this is basically about measuring the impact of your cloud workloads, establishing KPIs, and really just trying to find ways to evaluate the impact of your workload. And then we have establishing sustainability goals. So basically for each of your cloud workloads, establishing long-term sustainability goals, for example, doing things like trying to achieve maximize utilization, which we'll talk about a lot, and then also trying to reduce your storage for the resources. And then we have, again, maximizing utilization. So we'll dive into this a lot deeper, but really just what you want to focus on here is right-sizing your instances. So making sure that there's no resources that are idle, that are just running for the sake of running, that you are trying to get that highest utilization possible. So for example, 2 resources or 2 instances that are running at 30% utilization is a lot less energy efficient than 1 host that's running at 60%. And then next we have anticipating and adopting new, more efficient hardware and software offerings. So this is basically just about designing for flexibility. So making sure that your workloads are able to adapt to newer, more efficient technology. And it just requires a lot less work to move on to these efficient technologies. And then we have using managed services. So sharing services across a broader customer base helps maximize that resource utilization, which will reduce the amount of infrastructure that you need to support your workloads. And then this also lets you shift the responsibility onto AWS for doing those sustainability optimizations and operating those resources efficiently. And then last, we have reducing the downstream impact of your cloud workloads. So this is basically just really reducing the amount of energy that's needed or the resources that are required to operate your services. And then also doing things like reducing or eliminating the need for customers to upgrade their hardware or their devices to use your services. So when we're looking to make improvements, it's obviously important to consider how we can measure these improvements and how we can track them. So there's a lot of different challenges that come with measuring your carbon footprint, and getting accurate data with a high level of granularity is definitely one of them. So this still shouldn't stop any organization from making progress. So without direct sustainability metrics like CO2 emissions, for example, we can think about using the Proxy metrics method that was described at reInvent 2020 as a way to track your workload's impact. So if we take a look at a couple of different examples of proxy metrics, let's think about the size of your data, for example. So the larger the size of the data that you're transmitting, the more compute and the more energy it's needed. So that data size here would be a carbon proxy. And then if we're taking a look at the distance that that data has to travel, again, the more distance it's traveling, the more energy and compute is needed. So the distance here would be another carbon proxy. And then if we're taking a look at utilization, having the number of vCPUs that are required gives you a really good carbon proxy for the volume of compute that's needed for your workload. So even though it's not always possible to measure direct sustainability metrics, proxy metrics are a really great way to just kind of get you started in this space. So with proxy metrics in mind, let's take a look at a couple of areas in your workloads that, if you optimize, can have a really big impact on your carbon footprinting. So the first one that we have is compute. So for compute, it's a relatively easy place to start. And if you think about it, if you're optimizing for compute, you can also optimize away some of your cost at the same time. So we've touched upon this a little bit, but really just trying to reduce your idle resources and maximizing that utilization is what we want to focus on here. So the sweet spot that you want to hit for utilization is about 70 or 80%, and that's when your resources are the most efficient. And so AWS has a lot of different services that can help you do this, auto-scaling being one, for example. It can be used to automatically scale up and down your resources based off of demand so that you don't have idle resources and you're able to maximize that utilization. And then another really great way to improve power efficiency is by switching to the AWS Graviton processors, which we talked about briefly. But basically, these Graviton processors use up to 60% less energy for the same performance than comparable x86 instances. And then the last thing with compute is trying to choose serverless and event-driven architectures whenever possible so that you're really relying on AWS's compute optimization and right-sizing. Then next we have databases. So for databases, your focus should really be about optimizing your utilization, performance, and queries. And so using managed or serverless databases can shift that responsibility onto AWS for maintaining that high utilization and sustainability optimization of the underlying hardware. And so these managed or serverless databases can shut off when they're not in use, can quickly restart and scale based off of demand. So it's a really great place to get started. And then next we have storage. So what you want to focus on storage here is really assessing the data access patterns for your storage. So taking a look at different storage classes that we have. So for example, storing less volatile data that's not accessed as frequently on colder storage options is a great way to optimize for sustainability. And so when we're thinking about optimizing for storage, it's really about balancing trade-offs. So you know, like I said, if you're storing data that's not being accessed on colder storage, then you have to think about the fact that it might be harder to access that data when you do need it. So it's this balance between trying to meet business SLAs of being able to access that data when you need, but then also trying to optimize for sustainability at the same time. Then lastly, we have networking. So for networking, what we really want to focus on here is reading local and writing global. So a content delivery network can really be helpful here, where it'll bring your data a lot closer to your users by caching static content. And then also you want to think about compressing your data as well, so that the files that are traveling over the network are compressed and at a much smaller size. So basically, if we were to summarize these goals for optimization for your architecture, it would be maximizing utilization and CPU efficiency while eliminating idle resources and minimizing data processing and storage. So optimization of any kind is all about balancing trade-offs, which we touched upon a little bit, and of course, sustainability isn't any different. And so sometimes, you know, the most sustainable option isn't always the most cost-efficient, but this isn't always the case. And oftentimes, we're able to do both, where we're able to optimize for sustainability and lower your cost at the same time. So if we take a look at this alternative approach of doing less work and storing less stuff, so basically, doing the work more efficiently, driving up that utilization, doing things like using scheduling strategies, so shutting down your resources when they're not needed, removing idle resources. These are all really great ways where if you were to optimize for sustainability, you're able to drive down cost at the same time. So we've talked from like a theoretical perspective, a whole bunch of stuff that you can do in terms of optimizing for sustainability. But you know, let's take a look at some of these things that our partners have actually implemented that have helped them optimize for sustainability and gotten them closer to reaching their organization's sustainability goals. So we talked about Graviton 3 a little bit, but just as a recap, Graviton is a processor that was custom built by AWS to deliver the best possible price performance for your cloud workloads that are running on EC2. And so again, they use up to 60% less energy than comparable x86 instances. So here you can see some examples of some big name customers that are sharing their benefits that they're seeing in terms of performance, latency, and cost using Graviton. And so this has spanned a bunch of different areas, so including online gaming, social media, and observability systems. And so with these performance gains, customers need to deploy significantly fewer resources for the same workload as they would on premises or, again, even on AWS using comparable x86 instances. So if we dive specifically into the Honeycomb example a little bit, so when Graviton was initially released, they were one of the early adopters of the new instance type, and so they were basically able to see a 40% price and performance improvement just by moving some of their workloads over to Graviton. So in their initial migrations, they were running 30% fewer instances, which basically reduced their cost per instance compared to the regular C5 instances that they were using. And so they've written an entire blog series. I think it's like 3 parts. So if you'd like to read about it in more detail, you can definitely look it up. But they did specifically call out that they didn't have to change any of Honeycomb's code base to port these processors, only really needing to update their CI/CD pipeline to create build artifacts for a different architecture. And so since then, Honeycomb has been slowly working on migrating their workloads onto Graviton. And so a year later, they now have 92% of their vCPUs using Graviton, spanning almost all of their workloads and environments. Okay, so the next example that I have is NatWest Group and their adoption of serverless architecture. So basically, NatWest Group is a major financial services institution that partnered with AWS to build a scalable, secure, and sustainable MLOps solution. And so they basically wanted to try and use as many serverless AWS services as possible, primarily focusing on SageMaker Studio. And so NatWest Group basically has a goal to reach net zero carbon by 2050. And so they were really looking to optimize the amount of energy that was used for their training workflows. So they wanted a solution that was running on demand, would minimize compute requirements, drive down costs for them, and then again, drive sustainable ML development. And so they did this by, again, doing things like compression of the data into more efficient file formats, implementing scalable architecture so that they were able to reduce the amount of idle resources that they had, and really just heavily focusing on only provisioning the necessary resources for the work to be done. And so here you can see that based on initial calculations, they were able to see a considerable carbon emission reduction when compared to the normal cluster architecture that they had. And then the last example I have is of Tenable, which is a cybersecurity company. And so Tenable basically had a whole bunch of metric filters that were initially written in Node.js. And so as the size of their metric set grew, they were seeing some performance issues with their existing metric filters. So they decided to rewrite some of them using Rust, which is a more efficient programming language. And so basically, after choosing Rust, you can see some of the graphs from their migration here. But Tenable saw a 75% reduction in CPU usage and a 95% reduction in memory usage. So with this small change, they were able to optimize away over 700 vCPUs and 300 gigs of memory. So this is obviously a substantial savings, not just in dollars saved, but also in the energy that they were able to save at the same time. So I'll talk about a couple of examples of some tools and services that are provided by AWS that you can use that can help you analyze your workloads. So first, for metrics, we have services like Amazon CloudWatch and S3 Storage Lens, which can help you monitor the appropriate metrics for your optimizations. And these are the same metrics that you can also use for proxy metrics that we talked about, so it's a really great place for you to get started. And then we also have services like Trusted Advisor and Compute Optimizer, which can provide you with recommendations on how to optimize the efficiency of your workloads. And then we have the AWS Well-Architected Review, which includes a sustainability pillar, which can help review your workloads and architecture against sustainability best practices, and then will provide recommendations accordingly on things that you can address in your account and in your workload that can help it be more sustainable. And then, of course, the last thing that we have is the Customer Carbon Footprint Tool, which is a fairly new tool, but it was announced at reInvent last year. And this tool basically allows you to track, measure, review, and forecast the carbon emissions that are generated by the AWS usage in your account. So this will give you direct CO2 metrics as well for any services that you're using in your account as well. So it's a great place to get started. And with that, I will hand it back over to Deborsky, who will talk to us about some sustainability offerings.
All right, so I know you folks are here to know about sustainability offerings. And a few of these offerings are been offered by our ProServe team already. Few are getting actively developed at this moment, and so these are the ideas that we want to share with all our partners so that you can take the learnings from here, and probably when you develop your sustainability practice, you can start looking into these kind of offerings. So the first thing is understanding your carbon footprint, and you probably would have seen this slides plenty of places. But it's important for step towards our reducing a climate impact. And most customers today that they're looking at is essentially to improve their ability to report it out to the market, to the stakeholders, to the regulatory bodies as well. So they need help. they need guidance in terms of collecting those data, and they need help in understanding how their energy usage is breaking out across their various operations, various business units that they have today. And this framework, scope 1 through 3 all the way, these are pretty much widely used globally. And it has a scientific-based targets, and these targets have the ways to reduce the carbon footprint and a cross range of activities that needs to be performed by an organization. And from Mansi's talk, we understand that if we are doing lift and shift or any kind of migration or modernization with event-driven architectures and such, and serverless, we can definitely drive down a lot of these emissions and energy consumption and reducing the carbon footprint overall. But there's plenty more that we can do about it. And if you look into the right side of the screen, you could see all the way from sustainability strategy transformation to sustainable packaging and chill chain. These are the various offerings which are getting actively developed and done by our ProServe team, and we are helping our customers today. And most of the customers that we have seen, if you look from the top down, it's a spectrum of maturity level of our customers. So from all the way from low maturity customers to high maturity customers. And so for the most part, most customers really want to know if their strategy is sound. They want to know if their strategy is right, and they need some help and some directions along the way. And few may definitely want to have some kind of prescriptive data-driven guidance where our partners can essentially help. And it can start with some kind of a workshop with the customers. You can start working with their key stakeholders and understand what their driving factor is, and then kind of do a working backward session from there. The next level of engagement is the carbon footprint framework. And this essentially is a data layer, as you can say, and taking data from a lot of various business inputs and creating a dashboard around it, doing a real-time calculation of their carbon footprint and emission, and helping them generate those reports so that they understand what their carbon footprint is like today at this moment. Then further down, you can see sustainable building operations, and this is essentially using IoT sensors. You are integrating with some sort of building management system where you're talking to these building management systems in terms of HVAC, their electricals, their lightings, their water, and such, and getting those data inputs and driving some kind of optimization on those resource consumptions. And then further down the list, we have those sustainable packaging and chill chain, and this is essentially where you have the most matured customers in these category. So they already know what they want to do. So the first one is the advisory service, if we call it, and many organizations have already set these sustainability targets and objectives, but they kind of lack resources or knowledge or sort of guidance how to go about it. And again, as mentioned, our partners can engage with these customers, do working backward sessions from them to understand what their goal is, and then establish a blueprint to jumpstart their sustainability journey, and also help them be compliant and be competitive in the space that they're in. The next one, as mentioned, is the carbon footprint framework, and it's applicable to every customer doing sustainability reporting today. It's a framework that is essentially providing a data layer, and we are providing a dashboard on top of it. You are ingesting data from various services, various business units, various emission inputs, and you're assessing their carbon footprint. You're adding a dashboard layer to it. You're doing a real-time calculation of their carbon and emissions for their particular business. And although, as you can see, the inputs, packaging, refrigerants, transport here, the inputs can vary from customer to customer or from industry to industry, but from a framework's point of view, it does not change. And today, there is no such off-the-shelf solution or softwares that's available in the market today. So it's a huge differentiation factor for our customers, for our partners, who can help those customers develop this carbon footprint framework. So, and the next one is sustainable buildings and operations. So connecting higher level data of IoT, data from building management systems. And as we all know, the building management system essentially does not talk in IP protocols, they talk SCADA protocols. That's a totally different protocol altogether. So you can work with these partners from the BMS, from the building management, and get these services integration and get those key data and inputs. And few of the key data could be water usage, it could be HVAC, it could be wastage and all those stuff. And getting a high-level integration, don't get carried away and start getting a lot data initially. Start a very high-level integration with the building management system, get the HVAC, maybe the electricals, the lightings, and all the stuff, and add a dashboard and visualization layer to it so that your customers know where they are today and where they're kind of heading in their path to sustainability. The other offering that the ProServe team is working on is the energy management system, and they're essentially running AI/ML across building systems, various building systems, HVAC, lightings, and electricals as mentioned, and how much energy is spent today by our customers, and kind of do a prediction of the future usage and kind of make recommendations based on it. And last but not the least is the sustainable chill chain. So essentially, temperature monitoring end-to-end for a supply chain. So globally, around 1/3 of our food that we produce are kind of wasted today, and that's almost about $1 trillion as per World Food Program. Leveraging data collections from various IoT sensors and doing an AI/ML to ensure product transportation and storage is operating at optimum temperature to reduce waste is another use case that they're working on. And so essentially, it's temperature controlling from end to end. But as you can see, all the, few of the ProServe offering that we have mentioned here, it's a really good use case for your IoT-based projects or data analytics, advanced analytics, or AI/ML. So you already have this skill set, and you're just creating another offering and another practice to help the customers drive compliance. So there are plenty of case studies, but I'm going to share one of them, which is Coca-Cola ISAC, their distribution and bottle plant out of Turkey. And so CCI wanted to use digital twin for its clean-in-place process. And they wanted to develop the solutions so that they could improve their asset optimization, and they wanted to enable sustainability. They wanted to avoid any kind of downtime. So they engaged our ProServe team. This was a 2-month project, and our ProServe team created a digital twin for them. And they used AWS IoT Sitewise to get data and information from all the equipments at scale. And they applied the business processes as per the requirements, and they created a visualization and their path to sustainability. So the solution was built within 2 months, as I said, and it improved sustainability for CCI, and they actually saved around 20% of energy, saved 9% on water annually, and of course, time and performance gains as well. So with that, I'll highly encourage you to see a few of those sustainability offerings and our use cases and case studies that we have published online. And it's a great place to start. That can give you a great idea how to build these packaged offerings. And since you guys are our partners, reach out to your partner solutions architect, reach out to us, and we can guide you through the right people and build a sustainable practice for your organization. So with that, I'll be handing it off to Rolf. Rolf, take it away.
All right, thank you, Debashis. So I'm not here to talk about too much about Knowit as a company, but I will be giving you just enough context so that you can understand why the things that I'm going to be sharing with you are important for us as a company. So Knowit is a Nordic IT consultancy company. We're around 4,000 consultants. That's relatively large in the Nordic market. I come from Finland. The company is stock listed in Sweden, and my background is quite technical. I do have a bunch of AWS certificates, and my role in this, what I'm going to be sharing now, this kind of bird's eye view of our journey of building a sustainability practice, was kind of represent kind of the where the sustainability and the business and the technology meet in between. So from Knowit perspective, this is not something that we just decided in a short term that this is something that we need to have and we need to build. This is something that has been kind of woven into the company DNA for a long time. So we have been doing sustainability advisory for many years already in the Nordics market. And here is just like a few examples of the different things that what we're involved in, to showcase that this is something that we take very seriously, and like especially coming from a company operating in the Nordics, that where these things are like very fundamental, very value-based statements, that this is something that we need to be part of to kind of making sure that everything will move to a better direction for the environment and all the values in the future. So this is kind of something that I usually use as kind of a motivational picture, that when I tell people the term sustainability, that what comes to people's minds. And like still today, some people think it's kind of more like the picture on the left, like soft values, and like, okay, are these things like valuable to anyone, or is this even real? The global warming and equal things. So I would like to kind of, with this story, a little bit also change the perspective, that if you are still more in the left part, or moving to the right part, that like understanding that there's science-based facts involved here, and we have taken those as kind of the North Star or guiding light, that whatever we do needs to be kind of backed by science, backed by facts, backed by numbers, so that there's no unclarity that what direction we are impacting the change. So this is now kind of the bird's eye view to our journey, that how did we come up with the decision to create something like this, and where we actually ended up, and what happened in between. So first we of course started like fact gathering mission, that what is out there, what we need to take into account. And here's a list of a few different things kind of supporting our rationale to building such a practice. And you can find here maybe 3 different big themes in these items here on the list, where kind of maybe the first one is more like this governance and compliance things happening. There's a new regulation coming out saying that this is how companies, especially the large companies, that this is how you need to operate. This is what kind of information you need to gather in and report in case of sustainability. Then the second part is maybe kind of the business-oriented approach. So companies seeking competitive advantage, and companies seeking kind of value-based things, that how they're positioned when compared to other companies in the public eye, that kind of theme is the second one. And the third one is, okay, then the IT perspective, that what data does IT department need to provide for other parts of the company, and how they could be helped in kind of what they're seeking. So how does our practice then fit in the big picture? So as we heard earlier today, that AWS is doing a lot of things, and especially when it comes to AWS infrastructure. And maybe many of you are familiar with this shared responsibility model when it comes to security. So this is kind of applied from the same perspective, or same principles, that kind of the bottom layer, the infrastructure part, the fundamental parts of the cloud, that is like the cloud provider, that is AWS responsibility to take care of. And then kind of the blue part is generally considered, that's the customer responsibility. But because we are a company doing consultation work and acting as a managed service provider for the MSP, for the customer, we can help then the customer in their responsibility part, the blue part. So that is kind of the realm that where we operate, where our kind of services come into play, resolving sustainability issues in the top part of this picture. So here's like a very broad timeline, and what we kind of first embarked on a mission that this is what we're going to build, and then our plan that, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And I want to be kind of very honest with you that this is not like what I'm telling you, it's not kind of the final stop. It's not like the final destination. It's more about like the journey, that this is like iterative process. So we have now reached like kind of first stable state in our sustainability practice, and now we're like taking it always one step further. So of course, like we started planning, like what I showed you, gathering that rationale and designing, okay, this is going to be first iteration that we're going to do. And in March, earlier this year, in March, we went live with the first iteration. Okay, now we have this, and made the statement in a public PR release that this is what we are now offering to the market, and here's where we start now kind of working through that with our customers. Then this is kind of what is the kind of the value proposition for the customer, that what does the customer now get from all of this, that what we seek to build. So of course they will need to have the data in a format that supports their business. And as said, that some of this is driven by regulatory changes, and some of this is driven by just seeking competitive advantage. But we want to provide them with a tool set, like giving answers to these questions, so that each customer doesn't need to start building the same thing from scratch, and give it to them in a format that is like easy to understand and easy to iterate on. Then moving to the part that, okay, what's actually now in this practice, that what we did. So it is a framework consisting of actual tooling and best practices, and some of them are done in kind of the quantitative realm, so meaning that actually collecting metrics and data, and some of it is done in a qualitative realm, so more like a questionnaire-based approaches. So the carbon footprint calculator, that's like more in the quantitative end, so taking the consumption data from the cloud and then saying that, okay, that with this consumption, with these profiles and with these resources, this is kind of the footprint that you will have. It is like mainly reflected in two metrics, where one is the CO2 emissions and one is the other is like the energy consumed to run those resources in the cloud. And then the scorecard is more kind of then that qualitative part, that how to kind of like in an interview-based method gather information from the organization, that what is the kind of the qualitative impact of the customer. And then a few more, then diving to details of our kind of approach and methodology. This is pretty much in line with what we heard already earlier today. So this is also very, very common approach. So one of the choices that we did make from the get-go was that we don't want to kind of build something that is completely different than what kind of the respectable research institutions are saying. So we kind of adopted the best practices for ourselves as well. So the first step always when doing something is to understand where you are. And understanding here means like collecting the metrics, gathering them to in a meaningful way, so that you can then move to the analyzing them, and then move to the second part, which is optimization. And optimization just means that, like, based on those metrics, you can adjust that, okay, that let's consume this type of resource less, or let's change to, as we heard, that, for example, convert from Intel-based to ARM-based, or whatever the decision is like that. That's kind of the optimization approach. But then this is only gets you so far in your kind of journey towards sustainability. So that then the transformation part is then that when you start understanding that, okay, that maybe this whole part of service, this could be done in a completely different manner. One of the trivial examples, for example, is that if you have something in physical domain and then you switch that to do something in digital domain, then that physical to digital transformation is something that can possibly have like impactful sustainability outcomes as well. But first you need to kind of understand and have the ability to optimize before you can like go to the transformational part. And usually the transformational part also requires changes to the business side as well. So it's not only about technical things. We like to kind of distribute kind of the impact that we are measuring and doing to these kind of 4 quadrants. The direct, I'm going to quickly break this down for you for it to make a little bit more sense. So the direct part is that when there's like something that you do is having a direct emission or direct impact. So if you consume something more, then it produces more CO2 or it consumes more energy. That's kind of a direct impact. Then the indirect impact that by simply running something, you will have some like a secondary impact somewhere else. And then here on the horizontal scale, the platform part, that's simply now the AWS cloud, and the business part is then the application thing that you're running on top of the cloud. So understanding that it's not like a simple thing optimizing for sustainability, it doesn't just happen in one place, but you also need to understand that in which realm it happens. And tying that kind of approach back to the UN SDGs, and once again we are taking something that is already out there, not inventing something completely from scratch. So the direct impact usually, at least in this initial phases, happens with these SDGs 7 and 13, meaning that that's like how much you consume energy and how much do you create CO2 emissions. And then kind of the indirect impact, the dashed line around that is kind of impacting the other SDGs. With the SDGs, it's quite normal that if you have like some business or application that you choose the ones from this list that are relevant for you. So it doesn't usually make sense to try to kind of optimize around everything because many of these might not make sense in certain business context or in certain application context. All right, good. Then like few examples of things that we actually have in place. So the cloud carbon footprint dashboard. We are doing quite a lot, for example, like migration cases. So we need to have like tooling in place that supports those kind of scenarios. So we can use similar or kind of calculation methods that what is the impact, the benchmark impact when it's on premises and what's the impact then when it's in the cloud. So when we're using the same tool for assessing the both situations where we get comparable results. If you're only on AWS cloud, then there's nothing preventing you from using kind of the native tooling in AWS because what is important in this sustainability thing is not like that where you're in absolute scale with some value, because the most important thing usually is that you want to drive change to some direction. So you want to know the relative difference between like month 1 and month 2 and so on and so on. Then the AWS well-architected framework and the well-architected review are important tools in our tool chest, and now including the sustainability pillar. So that is kind of where this kind of these architecture optimization choices happen, what we heard Mansi talking about. And then the cloud sustainability scorecard, that's kind of bringing it all together. That is something that we would like to do with the customers like regularly, let's say like 2 times a year, to kind of understand the big picture that are we moving to the right direction with the customer or not. Then finally, wrapping it up here are like few examples of like customer user stories that what is the kind of the outcome from customer perspective from all of this. So different personas, different roles, of course, they appreciate different problems resolved from their perspective, but it's not only like one demographic that we're trying to serve, but like have that business professional and IT professional and the CEOs, and also in cases that if you're a publicly traded company, also have the investors to be provided with this information in a structured fashion. And with that, I will hand it back over to Muncie to wrap it up.
Awesome, thank you, Rolf. Okay, cool. So now that we have a better understanding of different sustainability use cases, offerings, what some of our partners are doing, where do we go from here? So going back to some of the sustainability principles that we talked about, mainly understanding your impact and setting sustainability goals. Basically, you want to try to establish a baseline, make optimizations, and then review the results. So again, using monitoring and reporting services is a great place to start. We have AWS cost and usage reports, and then again, CloudWatch metrics as well, to track the appropriate metrics and your sustainability impact over time. And then again, optimizing for sustainability is all about balancing trade-offs. So you also want to make sure that you're satisfying your business metrics. So you want to make sure that while you are optimizing for sustainability, you're still able to hit the business SLAs and metrics that you have set out for your organization. So really just kind of finding that sweet spot where you're able to do both is where you want to focus. So let's take a look at some potential next steps moving forward in your sustainability journey. So the first thing that we can do with partners is really around innovation, and so we have an entire digital innovation team for sustainability, which can frame a challenge specifically on sustainability and work backwards from there with you, and really just help you figure out what the art of possible is when it comes to sustainability. And then again, we have the customer carbon footprint tool, and then also the well-architected review as well, which is a great place to kind of get you started on reviewing the impact of your current workload and get suggestions on some of the optimizations and improvements that you can make in your workload. We also offer sustainability game days, which are centered around sustainability use cases, which is a really great hands-on way to learn about how you can optimize for sustainability. And we actually are running a couple of sessions throughout reInvent this week. So if you haven't had a chance to sign up, please definitely do go check out those game days. They're centered around different topics, sustainability obviously being one of them. And then I just want to end off with, consider migrating your workloads to AWS and taking advantage of the sustainability optimizations that we have out of the box. And so we have an array of professional services teams that can help you measure your sustainability impact, whether this is on AWS or even on your on-premises data centers as well. They can help you measure that impact and give you recommendations accordingly. This is actually the carbon footprint framework that Deborsky talked about. So that's what our professional services teams do. And then also, just consider building future workloads on AWS and using partner services as well that are already optimized with sustainability in mind. So it kind of takes some of that responsibility and load off of you. And so so with that, together, let's work on building a greener future. And thank you so much for joining us for our session today.